Welcome back, friends. Well, the last time we had a chance to get together here in the wood shop was day one for the brand new table saw that we added to the shop. Now, as I geeked out with you a little bit about last time, the SawStop branded saws are all about safety. They have some unparalleled safety-oriented features built into them, and that sort of watershed moment, that watershed addition to the shop has triggered in my little brain just kind of a renewed focus on safety in general here in the shop. And so that leads us to the inspiration for today's project. I actually want to build an outfeed table that will sit right behind the saw here. Now, what have I been using for outfeed support up to now? Well, one of these little guys, they're inexpensive, they're portable, they're easy to set up, and they will even fold up and sit flush against the wall and be totally out of the way when you don't need that extra support. So the times when you need something like that is when you've got a bigger workpiece that as you're feeding it past the blade, there comes a point where it gets heavier on that side past the main table than it is what's currently on the table, and it'll want to tip away and do that. So in lieu of having another person over there ready to catch the other end of the board, it's super handy to have something like that that will support that extra length as it gets off the main table. So ideally, it does that, and it folds up and it supports it. Now, these little guys, sometimes they will, let me see if I can kind of force it to misbehave, but sometimes they'll do that. The board will just, there'll be some friction there, and the stand will lift up and start lifting the board up, and worse yet, do that in the middle of while you're trying to cut it. So that, I think we can all agree, is kind of anti-safety, and that's one of my motivations for replacing that little guy with a freestanding outfeed table. Now, there's a couple of ways to do outfeed tables. A lot of people really like the fold-away design that flips down and folds out of the way when you're not using it. In fact, I think SawStop even makes an accessory that's specific to go with this saw that folds down like that. There's some awesome DIY designs that are fold-away as well. But for my purposes, my preferences, I think here in the shop, I want to do a freestanding table that's on wheels that I could wheel completely out of the way and put it aside if I needed to, but that I could also take advantage of that footprint beneath it to store perhaps saw-related accessories or other things. So that's the direction that we're headed with today's project. Stick around. Now, one of the design considerations that I want to bear in mind is the fact that the mobile base for the saw sticks out quite a little bit past the back of the cabinet of the saw. So to accommodate that with the design of my outfeed table, I'm going to build the foundation of it somewhat like you see here so that it straddles that, and that gives me the means to flush the outfeed table right up next to the back of the saw table so that I have that pretty much continuous support for material coming off the saw. Okay, so let's talk about materials for this project for just another moment before we sort of dive in with the rest of this. So I did do a little bit of assembly off camera so that I could sort of assess how much of this material is left and do I have enough to even complete this thing that I want to build. And it turns out I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel a little bit more than what I had remembered in terms of my supply of this stuff. So couple of things. What we're actually going to be doing to sort of just try to make good use of the supply that I have left and put it to some kind of use. We're actually dealing with two different gauges of this extrusion. Notice that the top one, there we go. Notice that the top one's a little bit wider than the bottom one. So two different gauges. That means that there's like two different types of joinery that I received when I acquired these secondhand bits of extrusion. And in some ways, like the right angle stuff is, the joinery is kind of interchangeable, but in other ways that it presents some, well, let's just say that there's workarounds for everything, and we're gonna make it work. So the last time we had a project with this extrusion stuff, we were using these no-show style of joinery. And that's where you have to drill these 17 millimeter holes, and they look really cool, but because we're using two different gauges of this stuff, that's actually, that option really isn't going to work, and I'm not too worried about it. The no-show stuff is cool, but this will be a cool project even without that. All right, so that's everything that there is to know about the framing. The shelves are going to be made out of plywood. Now, let's talk just a moment about wheels, and then I promise we'll get after building this sucker. So I do not want this outfeed table to move, like, at all, for the same reason that I didn't want that folding stand that we looked at the beginning of the video. Same reason I don't want it to move. So that means that your basic locking caster is out of the running, because even if you lock the wheel from spinning, the caster will still caster. It'll still rotate, it'll still spin if you put side pressure on the cabinet that it's mounted to. Now, I know that there are dual locking casters made, which means when you lock it, it not only keeps the wheel from spinning, but it also keeps the bearing from spinning as well. The thing is, though, I don't want to have anything that's going to actually increase the overall height of this thing. But I also don't want something that's sticking out from the side or the front that's something that I can trip over. Now, speaking of things you can trip over, when it comes to retractable casters, I really thought these were the bee's knees when I first discovered them. There's a couple of different brands of these, but you can buy them at Rockler Woodworking and Hardware. If you look online for retractable casters, you'll see pretty much the same thing from that's got about 8 different other brands of branding on them. So these are really cool. They are retractable casters, but it's kind of weird. You're going to raise or lower one corner of your workbench at a time. But then, yeah, they are these big old outrigger tripping hazards sort of a thing. So I went online looking for retractable casters, and lo and behold, the interwebs revealed something really cool I had never seen before, and I'm really excited about working with these. These are from Bennington Manufacturing, and they are super clever, super unique. Never seen anything like it, and we'll be working with these a little bit later in the video. I'm so pumped about showing them to you, so stay tuned for that. All right, so the foundation is coming together. Let's talk shelves. I think I mentioned earlier I wanted to add shelves to this guy, because why not? This footprint is just too irresistible to not want to go ahead and utilize it for storage. So off camera, I went ahead and cut to length a number of pieces and sort of pre-installed the joinery hardware. So we'll get those guys put in place next. So at this point in the project, this seemed like a good time to go ahead and bring this monstrosity over here and do kind of a test fit, I guess you could say. And as designed, our frame here sort of straddles the caster support for the mobile base on the table saw itself. Now, notice that that support sits a little bit higher than the frame of our outfeed table. I knew that that was going to be the case, so at minimum, we need to bring our supports for our lower shelf to be above that height. But then also the fancy casters that we're using sit even higher than that. So that means that our lower shelf needs to be at this level. And I started thinking, well, if we have to come up that high, what's the trade-off if we go ahead and set it up high enough so that the dust collection hose runs under the shelf instead of over the top of it? But that actually sits pretty high. The dust collection port sits pretty high, so I think I'd rather have the shelf lower so that I've got a larger cavity in here that I can store things on, and we're just going to have to put up with the fact that the dust collection hose also runs across the surface of that shelf. It's kind of unfortunate that that's the case, but that's just going to be what we're dealing with. It's kind of unfortunate that that dust collection port wasn't like on the side of the saw, but oh well, that's what SawStop chose to do, and so that's what we have to work around. I will say though that that's one of the advantages of like a fold up, fold down sort of a outfeed table design, is that you're not dealing with these sorts of issues with the dust collection hose as we are with this independent, separate table approach for an outfeed table. It's no big deal. We can work around it. Well, we'll be thinking about shelves fairly soon, but before we start covering up this area, let's look at what it takes to mount our nifty little casters. So since they require like a side mount affair as opposed to like more typical casters have the mounting holes in the top, the issue is with our frame is it's not tall enough to have anything to screw into. So I think what I'll do is just go ahead and make some mounting plates, for lack of a better term, out of wood that mount to the frame but stick up taller, that we can then mount our casters into that. Like most of us, I suppose, work and real life and whatever else gets in the way of our hobbies. And well, you know, so I've had this floor standing drill press for probably a year, but it's been only marginally useful to me because I've been wanting to build a drill press table for it. And embarrassingly enough, I've made little or no progress on it. So I have been continuing to use my old benchtop drill press, my little Craftsman over here, which is fine. It's done me well for years, but I'm excited to have this new drill press table at least far enough along that it's functional, and I'm excited about being able to film with it. I still have to do just a couple more things to it, namely a little removable sacrificial insert in the middle that I can drill into and not care about, and when it gets beat up you can pop it out and replace it. But what's fun is it's kind of like that feeling of a year ago when I brought the new tool into the shop. Well, it's kind of new again because it's got all this extra functionality to it, and I'm actually able to use it far more easily with the extra surface area and the adjustable fence for a backstop and all that great stuff. So, yep, loving it. Love having my crafty time here in the shop. I haven't mounted these guys to the frame yet. What occurs to me is that since our nifty little casters here need this much clearance up inside here, that means that my bottom shelf isn't going to be able to actually be secured directly to the frame. That shelf is going to have to sit at this height. So I think what I'd like to do, I'm going to go ahead and rip down some 2x4 material that I'll go ahead and secure to the backs of these guys, and then that'll give me some more width, some more meat to secure the bottom shelf too. So I'll go ahead and size down that material, and I know even though it won't show that much, I think I'd actually like to paint it before I actually install it. So we'll get going on that. So it's finally time to start getting down to actually installing our nifty little casters here and the mounting plates that we made for them. So when I was assembling the frame, you might have seen me pre-thread some nuts into the grooves here, and that was very intentional. For this very moment. So, I mean, and from there, this is pretty straightforward, right? And finally, a milestone, getting the casters on. I gotta say, the instructions that they provide are awesome and thorough. Being a technical writer myself, I really appreciate that. And the kit that they give you, very thoughtful and thorough as well. They give you the screws, they give you a big long pilot bit, which is really crucial for the way that these go on, and they give you a square drive bit as well. So, yeah, really impressive with all that. So the strategy is to kind of get this thing pre-positioned and straight up and down using a clamp. So we'll get that guy kind of roughly in place. See if I can find the holes so I don't cover them up. Yeah, see, I've kind of got the pad on the clamp that I'm using is kind of big. So I think I'm just only going to be able to get 2 pilot holes. We'll go ahead and drive those first 2 screws and then rinse and repeat. All right, easy enough. Let's just do 3 more. All right, so we're on the last step of the instructions. There's this little, oh, I see it. Yeah, there's this little shipping screw right here, and we're supposed to remove that. I'm so excited. I guess that just keeps the action from, you know, springing open during shipping, which makes sense. Okay, that's it. Okay, moment of truth. Does it work as advertised? Here we go. That's so ridiculously just genius. All right, then you lift again and drop, and they collapse. That's awesome. And I love, you know, that these are going to be inboard. They're not on the outside of the bench where I could kind of trip over them or what have you. This just helps take up a little bit, just that little bit less of a footprint in the shop. And now I will say, so on the website where they show some installation instructions and just how they work, there's some animation with a different style of bench that it's kind of the I guess primary application for where these are ideal. And you've got a bench with some kind of spindly legs and a bunch of clearance up underneath. Now, even though I was just so taken with these, though, I wanted to find a way to use them on this bench, even though it wasn't like maybe the ideal application. So even with the downside of losing a little bit of my storage capacity in this lower shelf here, because these have to sit so high, that's okay. I'm completely in love with them. So yeah, that's gonna be so nice. I want to do it again. And I'm gonna do it again. Okay, all right, on with the project. So there's one more step here to kind of prepare the base before we can start moving on with the shelves. And regarding that last step, I went ahead and pre-drilled off camera and then pre-installed 3 out of the 4 of these wood pieces. And I went ahead and saved the last one to just show you how they go together real quick. In this situation, I can take more direct advantage of the T-track that's all over these extrusions. And yeah, it's just the head of the bolt goes in that top T-track, and the countersunk holes in the wood give me space to drop in a washer and a nut on top to secure it, and that's it. It's probably somewhat overkill that I went ahead and painted these pieces, but because they won't really show that much. The mounting plates, though, the plywood pieces that the casters are mounted directly to, since the bottom edge of those is going to be right next to the concrete, there is some moisture factor there. I mean, yeah, we did go ahead and do a moisture barrier before we laid the concrete here in the shop, but moisture is still a factor, and it would suck if those started to like delaminate over time. So I figured that just the coat of just plain old latex paint kind of seals them up a little bit. That might last a little bit longer. And I had the paint hanging around. This is the same green that we painted the doors with here in the shop, and well, a few other things here and there as well. All right, it is just about go time with the laminate. I just want to dust this off one more time. There's a ton of fine dust created that comes from sanding back the filler. We did get all of our edge banding done. Again, I'm building 2 shelves. I'm just kind of leaving one of them on camera just to sort of follow the saga of getting one of them built, but just know that there are 2 in the pipeline. So yeah, this was jet black when I pulled this saw off. It was more like that. So we're picking up a lot of fine dust, and once we get the contact cement down, we want it to stick. We want it to stick. So there are some things about how this is coming out that are good practice for me. And that's one of the things about doing shop furniture is it's a good kind of a dress rehearsal for like real furniture that I want to do for in the house. So again, my woodworking journey has been very much stop and go, and it's been kind of mostly stopped for about the past year. So it's good to be kind of getting back on the horse and making stuff happen out here. All right, so here's the laminate that we're doing. This is, again, just leftover from the project when we did the miter saw extension tables. So we'll flip that guy on its back. This has been inside the house acclimating to like a room temperature for the past week. So it's still a little more curly than I'd like it to be. It's going to be kind of a pain in the butt to work with. But hopefully it all works according to plan. So what I like to do, you know, we've got a much bigger piece than we actually need, which is very intentional, because you don't want to, well, you just don't want to make it too short. You want some room for error. What can I say? I prefer not to live life at 10/10 in general, and this is one of those places where it plays out. So we've got plenty of extra laminate, but I really don't want to waste any glue that I don't have to. So I'm going to go ahead and trace where I actually for sure need glue, because I don't really need to come way out to the edges here. Even if I came out to here, that would still be fine. So this will be the first time I've used spray-on contact cement. I usually get the kind that's in a can that you like put on with a just a scrap of the laminate or like a roller. But I wanted to give this a try. We'll see how it goes. It's a bit more expensive per ounce, but coming out of the can, I presume it's going to be a whole lot more convenient and easier to get like an even coat. One of the challenges I've had, again, with this laminate being kind of curly, is you'll get a little bit too much contact cement on there and it will want to flow away from the edges and it'll kind of pool at the valleys. So I'm kind of hoping that this will be the antidote to that issue. Let's see how this goes, boys and girls. Ooh, that goes on really interesting. It's this kind of spider webby sort of looking stuff. Feels like the spray pattern isn't like really even. You get like edges, but then like nothing in the middle. So it's kind of weird. Yeah, it's not the greatest nozzle, I will say. Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I feel like just parts of this are dry. Or it just goes on really, really clear, and I'm gonna end up with just a ridiculous amount. No, it's like dry. Huh. Yeah, you can kind of see here better. I can see better. I'm not sure if it shows up on camera, but it's like really heavy at the edge of that spray pattern, and then it's really thin in the middle. So, oof. Yeah. So I guess the moral of the story is just make sure you really do overlapping passes. Yeah. So there's a tiny bit in there, but this one can just did this one shelf, and that's all I'm going to get out of it. So, yep, makes sense why they use the other stuff. So this is really convenient for a really small project. But if you're doing something big, I mean, you wouldn't want to get, 10 cans of these to do like the countertops in your kitchen. So, yeah. So I paused the camera and reread the directions on the can. It says, hey, stick everything together within 5 minutes. So we're gonna scoot some things around here just a smidge. Here goes nothing. All right, folks, here we are at a defining moment in this project. It is the next day, and the question on everyone's minds, or at least mine, is did we end up with a viable shelf, or do we have scrap? Did the contact adhesive do its job, or not? Now, assuming everything went well, this is kind of the satisfying part. We'll go ahead and trim off the excess laminate. My bad, you missed part of the show. I started out with what turned out to be a very dull bit. And so I paused the camera to switch bits, and I got so excited about doing this, I forgot to restart the camera. So we're almost all the way around here. All right, I'm going to call shelf number 1 a success. That second router bit just gave us a nice little bevel on the edge. I did end up doing a little bit of sanding just because there was some excess contact adhesive on the edge banding. But then, yeah, and the good news is, looks like our contact adhesive did its job and things stuck where they were supposed to stick. So yes, 1 shelf down, 1 to go, and then we can get these puppies installed. Hey, just real quick before we move on, I didn't set out for this episode to involve a product review, but I've got one kind of laid at my feet. I've had a chance to try now 2 different brands of spray adhesive. Both of them are labeled that they are meant for laminate, among other things. And so we talked about this one a little bit, which was, yeah, you run out of it real soon and it doesn't go very far. And again, the price per ounce comparison to the, I think it's the Weldwood brand that's everywhere that comes in a little quart can with a lid you pry off, just like a quart-sized can of paint. So we kind of talked about what this was, that the spray pattern wasn't so great. It was heavy. It's a fan-shaped pattern, which is great, but it's heavy at the outside and kind of weak in the middle. The 3M was the second one that I tried. This is the high strength 90 contact adhesive. So the spray pattern was better on this one, but not stellar. I would like to see better, but it's a single-use thing. You throw it away, and as long as you're doing overlapping passes, it all works out in that sense. I still went through, there's a tiny bit, you can hear that. There's a tiny bit left in there that I probably should have used up the rest, and actually I tried, but the one thing about this one is it seems like you started running out of propellant before you started running out of the product. So they could have juiced this can up with a little bit more oomph to be able to allow you to use the last of the product. But I got to that point where I was getting air, but not enough air to actually drive the product out of the nozzle. So that was kind of the disappointment where this one was concerned. Overall, if I were to recommend one over the other, the price point is about the same. This one gives you 1 extra ounce than this one does. So as far as like price based on volume, this one comes out just maybe a tiny bit ahead or pretty close to dead even probably. The spray pattern is better on this. Overall, I would advise the 3M over the Loctite, but not by a big margin. Now again, the contact cement in the can, like I said, it's got pitfalls of its own, but all in all, I think that's going to be my preference and my go-to going forward, and that's how that all shakes down. Okay, on with the build. And with that, we're on the downhill side of this project. We've got the frame built, we've got the nifty casters installed, we've got the shelves built and installed, so now it's time to turn our attention to the top. Now, as I go down the list of things that I could use for the top, my first instinct is to go with either plywood or MDO that I could, again, edge band and do laminate on, just like we did for the shelves. Now, for the shelves, yeah, I used some junk plywood that was kind of curvy and warped and whatnot, and the laminate that I had was a leftover from another project, and I got that stuff for really cheap years ago, and it's not great quality laminate anyway. But for the top, I really want it to be dead flat, and I want it to be a little bit more rugged. And so when I think about the cost of sheet goods plus the glue plus more laminate and the time investment, I started going outside the box. Well, actually, it's not outside the box for this channel. If you've been hanging around with us at all, you know that it's very much in the box to do repurposing and upcycling things. So I went on Facebook Marketplace and I found this dining room table for free. The slab at the top of this table is 1 inch thick, and I think all I need to do is just kind of remove the skirting that the legs were bolted onto, and then we'll take it over to our frame, just kind of lay it on there, and do a little bit of a test fit and see what the prospects are. Okay, so our little test fit here reveals what I expected it to. I actually planned for this. So our outfeed table does sit a little bit lower than the actual height of the saw table. And for the most part, that's okay. It's okay for an outfeed table to sit lower. Let's see what we're actually dealing with, though. We'll just use this square, set that depth, lock it down. Yeah, it's about 4 millimeters lower, and that's actually a little bit too much for my tastes. So the thing is, you absolutely positively don't want it sitting higher, because then at that point, as you're running material off of the saw, it will catch on your outfeed table, and number one, that's dangerous. Number two, you just screw up your cut. You end up with a little dent in your cut instead of a nice laser straight line. So notice that we haven't installed the upper rim of the aluminum rail on our frame. So that's actually our next step, and with a little bit of a finesse of how that's installed, we're going to be able to kind of jack things up a little bit so that the overall table height is jacked up a little bit when we're all said and done. So I'm going to use that same square that you saw me use a minute ago, and it was reading 4 millimeters. I'm going to set that actually for 3 millimeters, and we'll just use that as kind of a depth gauge for when we lock down the fasteners that join these pieces of aluminum together. And that'll get us where we need to go. All right, so we're looking pretty good here. I'm getting excited. There's just one kind of odd little chore left to do here, and that is to extend these grooves that the miter gauge rides in on down the outfeed table. Now, there's a couple schools of thought on that. I've seen folks extend that groove all the way across the full width of the table, but personally, I don't think I want to gouge up this surface and crater it any more than I absolutely have to. So when you think about when you're moving material past the saw, you really only need for the face of the miter gauge to get past the blade. Once that's done, your cut is complete, and the miter gauge really doesn't need to move any further on down the table, right? So what if, even if we get, a couple inches past the blade, just for good measure, right? Just so I've got a little bit of extra runway, and we end our groove like right about here, and like that's it. However, I do also have this tapering jig that I use from time to time, and it has a much longer runner on it. So with that in mind, what are we up against here? If that, for it to get past the blade, we're looking at pretty much middle of the table for this guy to clear the blade. So that would kind of seem to be the spec that we work to, is our worst case scenario with my tapering jig. So let's break out the router and a straight edge, and we'll get cracking on this. Now, I think the slots that I make in the outfeed table, rather than try to make them the exact same width as the miter gauge slots in the cast iron, I'm going to go ahead and make them quite a bit wider. Not a ton wider, but wide enough so that when I snug the outfeed table up to the saw, I don't have to be super anal precise about aligning those slots. If there's a little bit of wiggle room, that's fine. The heavy lifting that the slot needs to do to keep the cut aligned, the cast iron does that job. By the time the miter gauge or sled hits the outfeed table, the cut really doesn't need to be guided anymore. So I'm going to save myself some hassle and make those slots a little bit wider. Most of the time, I feel like the table saw and the outfeed table will sit right where you see them now, but there will be occasion when I'll need to move the two of them around independently, and in those instances where I then need to butt them up to each other again, like I said, I don't want to have to fiddle with that super precision alignment of the slots on the cast iron with the slots on the outfeed table. All right, here we go. Went ahead and put the blade guard back on. So our little slots, that's what that's supposed to do in life. Good. Now, let's take it all back to that very same hunk of scrap that I was fussing with at the beginning of the video, using with that teeny little stand, and shedding a light on how precarious that was. let's do it this way. Yep, that's exactly that's exactly how that's supposed to feel. You finish the cut and your workpiece isn't sitting on the pinhead of some precarious teeny little stand where I might be tempted to do something dumb and spontaneous and reach across a tool with a spinning blade and make sure that my workpiece is okay. Blade guard or not, I don't care. All those temptations are gone, and this whole work area is just that much more idiot-proofed. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, having purchased a SawStop, safety is kind of at the core of why they do what they do, and that mindset just kind of couldn't help but resonate with me. So taking it one step further with the outfeed table, super glad that I built this. Obviously the purpose of the top and it's supporting of the workpiece, that's pretty self-explanatory and ridiculously awesome in and of itself. But then the storage down below, I'm really stoked about having just that much more storage. So with that, this is just, again, one step closer to having the shop built out and tooled up for all of the built-ins that we want to be doing inside the house. There's some cool projects that I've got on the drawing boards. I'm super anxious to get to those. You probably are too, maybe a little bit wearing thin on spending time just building out the shop for the sake of the shop. It is a means to an end, I promise. So I want to get there. You want to get there. Renee definitely wants to get there. So thank you so much for sticking with me along this journey of me kind of getting back up to speed with woodworking in general and all the little steps between here and there. Thank you so much for watching He Said, She Shed. Take good care and take good care of each other, and we'll see you real soon on the next one. Good day, everybody.